Imagined Communities is a 1983 work of political theory by the Anglo-Irish author Benedict Anderson. Anderson was born in China in 1936. He went to school at Eton, then studied at Cambridge, before becoming a Marxist and teaching at Cornell University, where he specialised in Indonesian studies. Imagined Communities is his best-known work and is an extended attempt to explain the invention and global spread of the modern nation-state. It was significantly updated in 1991, then again in 2006. Anderson died in 2015 at the age of 79. Anderson defines the nation as an imagined political community, and imagined as both inherently limited and sovereign. It is imagined as a community because, regardless of the actual inequality and exploitation that may prevail, the nation is always conceived as a deep, horizontal comradeship. Ultimately, it is this fraternity that makes it possible for so many millions of people not so much to kill as willingly to die for such limited imaginings. For Anderson, thus defined, the nation-state is not very old. It emerged in South and Central America first, as the Spanish Empire broke down, and Spain realised it could no longer hold on to its territorial possessions. There was an entire ruling class in the New World, Creoles, who, although ethnically Spanish, were not regarded as such by the mother country. When the colonies were cut loose, they feared being overwhelmed by the numerically superior indigenous population and by slaves. This fear created a common identity. In other words, the modern nation-state was forged partly from racial dread. The white or Creole population felt it had to unite to protect itself against its perceived enemies. It was aided by the invention of the printing press. A common identity could be forged by tracts and pamphlets. Print language is what creates nationalism, Anderson tells us. Nevertheless, racism and nationalism, though related, are not the same thing. Nationalism thinks in terms of historical destinies, Anderson says, while racism thinks in terms of eternal contaminations. The dreams of racism actually have their origin in ideologies of class, rather than those of nation, above all in claims to divinity among rulers and to blue or white blood and breeding among aristocracies. The dominance of the nation was bolstered by the invention in the 18th century of the newspaper and the novel. The newspaper was premised on the notion of simultaneity and of an us, an imagined community especially affected by these events happening now. The novel was premised on events embedded in societies taking place in a homogeneous, empty time. Both newspaper and novel involved a reimagining of time and space as somehow uniform things in themselves which we all inhabit and share. When the nation was imposed on global geography by European colonialism, its success was abetted by three things: the census, the map, and the museum. The census defined who belonged within a particular territory, but it also became more visibly and exclusively racial as time went on. Religious identity tended to disappear as the primary means of classification. The map defined the new territory and reinforced the new homogeneous notion of space. Cairo and Mecca, Anderson says, were no longer simply sites in a sacred Muslim geography, but also dots on paper sheets, which included dots for Paris, Moscow, Manila, and Caracas. And the place relationship between these indifferently profane and sacred dots was determined by nothing beyond the mathematically calculated flight of the crow. The museum became important as more and more ethnic Europeans were born in the colonies. They wanted to showcase the achievements and traditions of their birth countries. It really came into its own in the era of post-colonialism. The new rulers wanted to foster a sense of one national community with deep historical roots. In the process, everything became secularized. Hindu, Muslim, and Buddhist artifacts were isolated from their original contexts and juxtaposed. a process which subtly assisted their assimilation to the capitalist market. If the modern nation only really emerged in 16th century South and Central America, what was the dominant political paradigm in the centuries beforehand? Well, pre-modern national communities were based in sacred languages such as Latin, Arabic and Pali, imbued with an impulse largely foreign to nationalism, the impulse towards conversion. Additionally, they were centred on royal courts, where borders were porous and indistinct, and sovereignties faded imperceptibly into one another. For Anderson, not until 1870 did people start thinking of boundaries as segments on a continuous map line, corresponding to nothing visible on the ground. In the pre-modern national world, there was also no radical separation between past and present. It was normal for medieval painters, for example, to depict biblical figures in then-modern dress. Imagined Communities is probably one of the most important political works for the last half of the 20th century. It's comparatively short and very readable, but there's a lot more to it than I can possibly cover here. So as usual, over to you.